Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery. So, and when we say this, it is just like slavery was years ago. And it's actually estimated that there are more victims involved in slavery now than when slavery was legal. Just to kind of give you an idea of the numbers and how big of a problem this is. And it's where men, women, and children, so it can affect anyone, are bought and sold for either labor or sex purposes. So someone is profiting off of their actions. They are under the control of another person, of another group, and they are forced to either perform sexual or labor services for that individual.
Well, sadly, human sex trafficking, I mean, it affects girls and boys, children and adults as well, men and women, and it's around the world. I mean, I know that the UN estimates there's about 25 million people that are being trafficked in the world today. But that number includes labor and sex trafficking. And so what that means is there's more slaves today, which is what it really is. It's human slavery, either for labor or for sex. There's more slaves today than at any point in human history, which is just a shocking thing to know.
We have to really consider that we're all profiting off of this, unfortunately. So when we buy, we have to consider our clothing, our electronics, even our fruits and vegetables. Where are products that we're consuming? Sugar. I mean, think of how many products you eat in a day that have sugar in them. And people are all involved. People are being exploited. They're being trafficked, and we're all benefiting off of this. So it's helping us as consumers, because we want to buy the lower price things, but we don't realize the story behind that product. How did that, who actually suffered, so that we can spend $2 less on a certain product. So, and I think it's a social justice issue of our time. How can we, let this happen? We know this is going on. And yet sometimes we turn our heads. We don't want to admit or acknowledge, our role in this. And as far as sex trafficking, the media, if we look at how younger and younger individuals are being sexualized, we're having toddlers who are being sexualized, toddlers in tiaras, that they have pole dancing classes for toddlers now. And we're sexualizing at a younger age and giving the idea that, your appearance is something that you can profit off of. That it's okay, and the message that we're giving men and boys, that women are objects. There's something that should be for consumption of males. So it's everywhere, and in every facet of society. We often, we're not paying attention, or we really don't want to.
Well, I have to give my disclaimer, because before I get into some of the factors that cause us to be number 4, we also like to take that statistic and kind of put a more positive spin on it, that we're 4th in the nation for investigations, arrests, prosecutions, and rescuing victims. Just because we are 4th in the nation does not mean that other cities don't have a similar problem, but they just don't have the resources or the knowledge to be able to respond to it. So we like to think that those numbers are a little bit higher, because we know what the problem is and we know what we're looking at. So same goes for all the other cities here in Ohio. Columbus, Dayton, Cleveland, all of those really have a similar problem, but we just have an understanding of what we're looking at, and we've got federal task forces and things like that to investigate it. So we like to take the glass half full on that for a particular statistic. But some of the factors that play into it, we have our interstate highway network. So Toledo itself is an origin city, so that means that victims are not only trafficked here, but they're recruited and trafficked in other places, taken to other states and other areas to be trafficked. So our highway network, our high number of truck stops, our proximity to the border, and there's also some socioeconomic factors that play into that.
There is a stat that says that Toledo is number 4 in the nation, and on the face of it, people are like, oh my gosh, but it has been misquoted in newspapers, and we have the 4th most active Innocence Lost Task Force in the country. So the FBI Innocence Lost Task Force, there are I believe 45, they're in 45 different cities around the United States. So not every city has one. And a lot of the larger cities do have the task forces. But Toledo does have a task force, and ours is the fourth most active as far as arrests and investigations for trafficking. So we are behind Miami, Portland, and Las Vegas. So, I mean, we are up there with some of the larger cities, but we don't want people to think, that we have the biggest problem or that it's not a problem in other cities, because this happens everywhere. Okay. And as far as things that might make cities or areas more apt for trafficking, I mean, movement, we have the 80, 90, we have 75, access to, we're close to Detroit, the international airport, the rates of unemployment, runaway homelessness rates, those sorts of things that make youth more vulnerable to being trafficked, because we have been identified by the FBI as a significant recruitment area for domestic minor youth into sex trafficking. So our youth are at a greater risk here for being trafficked, but we don't want to mislead people with that stat. So it's based solely on the Innocence Loss Task Force data, because we're not going to say, we have a worse problem than New York or Los Angeles. I mean, those cities are definitely larger, and we're, anticipate that they would have, more individuals. Right. So, and would also, as far as traffickers in our area, there's generational traffickers here. So it's a family business, and, they're related. Maybe their nephew, their father, their brother, and it's just a way for them to make money. It's their family business, the way that they see a way for them to provide for themselves and for their family. So.
We're really have made some huge strides, especially here in Ohio, with taking a more victim-centered approach. There's definitely still a long ways to go within that, but people are really starting. First, we had to even, label it, then we had to figure out, okay, what is it we're looking at, and then we are now, one of the subcommittees at our coalition is policy, protocols, and procedures. So we go in and we set up protocols for, school officials and things for how to report it, or health departments that may encounter a victim and things like that. So we are doing a much better job now of starting to quantify the problem, defining it, knowing what we're looking at. So we are making some steps there with how, our service delivery for victims. And then I mentioned earlier the street-based prostitution. We're finding a lot of that is shifting onto online. So they're really posting, advertising a lot of girls online there too.
So with social media I think it has the potential to really, get people involved, get people excited about participating in this issue. I think that, there's been many campaigns launched. We've witnessed the power of social media in the past few years, just within, certain countries being able to mobilize. So there is it's a very powerful tool. And that being said, I mean, there's negative things about social media as well. As far as youth, not being safe on Facebook and becoming targets because their recruitment does happen online as well. We do know that. Or even providing a way for youth to be advertised. There was Craigslist that had the advertisements. That was shut down, but it was pushed farther underground now. We have Backpage.com, there's escorts. And we know that youth can't be trafficked on those venues, but it's harder. It's getting harder to police that kind of activity. And then as far as YouTube, it can glamorize. I think sex trafficking. It can glamorize those sorts of that exploitation of women. So it just depends on what media we're putting out there, and who's consuming it. Because youth are consuming over 8 hours of media a day. I mean, that's an entire work day, and and that's often unattended. Their parents don't know what they're watching. Their parents aren't aware or involved. If they're not checking their social media sites, there is a great risk or danger for those youth.
Well, I think the reason for that is society. I mean, media and movies. I mean, we play around, I think, too much with sexuality. We act like it's just something for fun. It's just and to me, I think it's a deeper, more profound thing than that. It's just not like having sex with whoever you want. I mean, and everyone's got their own set of morals and how they view things like that. But I just think we have a very loose sexual culture. And of course, it's interesting because we think about overseas, like the Muslim faith. When we're considered a Christian nation from the perspective of the world, sometimes that's what they call us. And it's just like, well, that's just silly. I mean, we're not a Christian nation. It's not like we're all following biblical truth or something. Right. And so then, but for, like I said, for conservative Muslim people, they look at us and say, yeah, look at the Christian nation. And they see our television shows and they see our movies and just the highly violent and highly sexualized material it gives it kind of a skewed view of what's going on over here. But I think that's part of the problem is that we don't think that much of it. And so things like, I mean, because I see it, in TVs and movies. I mean, they make fun of strip clubs. They make fun of pole dancing. They make fun of prostitution. They literally make fun of it. And it's just like, well, no. And so I think it's this numbing effect. People just feel like, well, prostitution's been around a long time and pornography. And, these girls are beautiful, and so they just make money through pornography. Or these girls, they're just taking advantage of, they're making money, and that, they just like having sex, and they're just going to make money off of it, and the view is, and so many people, especially the sexual predators, that's how they rationalize in their mind. It's just like, look, I'm paying the lady, she's making money, that's why she chooses to make a living, what's the big deal? Nobody's hurt. It's a victimless crime is the idea. Everybody's making money, but that is such a lie, and that's the thing that really needs to change. I mean, obviously, and I'm glad it's finally changed for the adolescents. I mean, it used to be at 13 you could be arrested for prostitution. You were called a child prostitute, and I don't even know how you can put those two words together. Right. But at least now we have laws that say, no, if you're 17 or younger, this is a crime perpetrated against you. But I believe it should be that way as well for 18 and above. As I mentioned, over in Europe, in the one country, this should be, it's a crime of victimization even for adult women. They're trapped in this for one reason or another. They're not choosing this lifestyle. This is not a profession for them. And the research bears that all out. We need to be helping these women. And until all of society changes their mindset, and instead of either looking at prostitutes and saying, well, those are just dirty, filthy women, and that's the life they've chosen, so they get what they get. They deserve it. Either looking at it that way or looking at it, well, they're making money, and that's their profession, that's what they want to do. We've got to stop that. We've got to realize that, as the research shows, that in the 90th percentile of these women, they would get out if they could. There's something that's got them trapped there. And I would think that as a society, we should say, all right, we're going to at least help that 95% that say they want to get out. And I ultimately believe the other 3, 4, 5% that say, no, this is my choice, that if they were truly given a choice and could see that they could get out of that, they would. But, I'm not concerned about that. Let's at least help the other percent that say they want to get out and understand the problem.
I think that there's definitely a stigma that goes along with the fact that it's sex trafficking. I gave my first presentation to a school classroom a couple weeks ago, and I can tell you I've never said the word sex so many times in a classroom. Luckily, it was in between child sex trade or sex trafficking, but there's definitely a stigma I think that goes along with it, and that's why it's really important to shift that stigma away from the children and the youth and adolescents and stuff, and to the customers. Because, not every prostitute or not everyone is going to necessarily be a victim. Some are out there not working with a trafficker or doing it of their own will. But that every time the customer is always wrong. So, a lot of times we'll arrest the victim a lot more frequently than we do the actual customer. But if you don't know whether or not the prostitute is a victim or not, you know that the customer is always breaking the law. So you should be arresting the customers more. So I think there's definitely kind of a stigma that goes along with it. There's also it's a very invisible crime, and so any efforts to raise the invisibility of it or raise the visibility of it are really important. There's a lot of sex trafficking, especially children, that goes on at truck stops in our area, and we're working on a campaign right now to encourage places, to travel plazas and things like that, to hang up posters. But a lot of places claim that it's not family friendly, and so they think it'll hurt their business, so they're not really willing to. So we have a couple of volunteer groups who just started an outreach project for us.
So for international victims, there are different ways that we can kind of identify. And just because some of these risk factors are present doesn't necessarily mean they're trafficked. I mean, you have to weigh it within context and everything, but if the person is with someone and that person that they're with is withholding their travel documents, not letting them speak for themselves, and they seem very overbearing to that person. They're not willing to, if the person needs a translator, they say no, that's fine. They don't need it. I can answer for them. If the person who you suspect is being trafficked, has visible signs of physical abuse, bruises, scratches, those sorts of things, and talking to them. If you find out that they live and sleep in the same place, or they live and work, sleep and work in the same place, so they're actually, confined to one area. Do they have to ask to leave, to go to the store? Are they allowed to go to the store by themselves? Can they go to the bathroom unattended? So are their movements very restricted? You want to find out that sort of information from them. And, are they fearful? And do they seem, very untrusting as well? And some of this can be cultural, but you have to, kind of know the questions to ask, and we want to make them feel as comfortable and safe as possible when we are interacting with a potential international victim. As far as sex trafficking on the domestic side of things, a lot of times youth they will be branded or tattooed, so with the trafficker's name, so on the back of the neck, on the wrists, some sort of place like that, and it's not like John. It's the trafficker's nickname, so Pimp Daddy, or whatever his name is, his nickname is. They will often have that tattooed on their body. Signs of broken bones, bruises, recurrent STIs or STDs, frequent need for pregnancy tests. They are being sexually active, so
Right.
those sorts of things are present. Do they have hotel room? The key cards. If you're under 18, you're not supposed to have access to being able to get that. Dating a much older, controlling person, are they actually dating that person, or is this person controlling them? Kind of find out the relationship. If a 30-year-old is dating a 15-year-old, there's probably something wrong with that anyway.
Right.
But, find out more information about what's going on. Frequent absences from school. A lot of times, you can be trafficked in your own town, but trafficking can entail movement. So are they missing, having large blocks of absences from school, and signs of, maybe if they're wearing certain jewelry or clothing that they didn't wear before, that their family may not have access to purchasing. So, a big change in appearance can also be an indicator. You could ask them, where did you get that ring? It's so pretty, and kind of start asking to see how they came to have these items. I think, as far as trafficking, as far as any social issue, I think that we could always do more, that we'd always like to see more happening. And I think our government has really stepped up to address the issue. We have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is federal legislation that was passed in 2001, I believe. I think I have the right date. And that identified and defined what trafficking is. So it's great that we have that federal legislation. We have federal agencies who are involved in identifying and rescuing victims. We have grants that go out. We have funding options. We have a lot of agencies that have mobilized on this issue. The Rescue and Restore program run through the Department of Health and Human Services. Great support, but that being said, there can always be more. We could always use more funding. I don't think that a social service program, I think we never have enough, definitely. And I think that we really need to encourage states and on the federal level as well to improve our legislation. I don't think we're doing enough on the labor trafficking front. And I believe that that's a huge injustice, because we know that we are benefiting off of these individuals, but we don't want to, admit our involvement. And California has legislation where I believe it's the transparency of, I can't remember the act name, sorry, and they actually want companies to identify how they got their products. And I think we should demand more out of our companies. I would love to know, where, this product came from. Was it produced in a humane and ethical way? Or were there people at risk? that were people being detained? Were they being held forcefully and made to produce these items? Because a lot of times they will hold their passport, hold their travel documents, force them to work in these factories, and they can't escape. And we're here benefiting off of that. We're turning a blind eye to it.
So there's if you think about any like legal enterprise or any enterprise, basically there's supply and demand and distribution. So the distribution would be the traffickers, the supply again would be the victims. But as anyone knows, you can't have a supply without a demand. So the demand is the customers, the Johns as we call them, the people who are purchasing the actual victims, which our last research study, we asked victims who purchased them, and it's everyone from the drug dealer to the factory worker to judges, politicians, law enforcement, all different types of people. So our next law that we're working on right now is called the End Demand Act, because basically if there's no demand, then there's no need for a supply. So we're really trying to take attacking demand as one of our strategies to reduce it in Ohio.
Well, I think in terms of, how do we help sex trafficking survivors, sex trafficking victims, the single most important thing anybody can do, I think, would be helping and raising awareness, and, go and learn yourself about it, visit our website, go to the internet, talk to some people like Dr. Celia Williamson, and learn about how it's happening, and then start raising awareness about it, and tell as many people as you can about it. And depending upon your position, you might be able to tell more people. If you have connections with the media or something, have them, talk to them and say, well, can you do a story about trafficking? People should know. Or the same thing with law enforcement, be able to tell them so that they're more aware of it. So that's one thing people can do. For us, as I said, we're the only, which is crazy, but we're still the only adolescent recovery home in the whole state. Well, then, come work with us. Join one of our committees, adopt a daughter. Get involved with our organization in some way, or start your own organization. I don't feel any sense of competition between anybody. We're not a company, we're a nonprofit. So if somebody else starts another home in the city, I'd be glad. And we're doing everything we can. We've had people from Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Missouri contact us and say, hey, what are you doing? Well, we want to do that in our state. We want to do that in our community. And so we freely, give them copies of our bylaws and our policy and procedures, so they can, what we're doing is basically giving them a jump start on starting their own organization.